Live from London, you're watching BBC News. Extreme heat grips the globe from the US to Asia and Africa as record temperatures continue. We'll be live in Spain, Italy and Greece as the heatwave intensifies in Europe. New details emerge about the US soldier who crossed from South to North Korea illegally. Protesters throw rocks at police and they respond with tear gas as tempers flare over the cost of living and high taxes in Kenya. A major new excavation is underway in Pompeii, the Roman city destroyed by a volcano almost 2,000 years ago. Hello, I'm Marianne Mashiri. Welcome to this edition of BBC News Now. Exceptional heat is continuing to be felt across large parts of the Northern Hemisphere. Let's get you the latest pictures from just a few hours ago. Wildfires, you can see, spread across Greece. Well, southern Europe is also hugely affected by the heat, but the situation is global. Let's take a look at this map. All of the red you can see here shows temperatures above 30 degrees. In China, Beijing has registered a record of 27 successive days where the temperature exceeded 35 degrees Celsius. And in Phoenix, Arizona, even fiercer heat with highs of at least 43 degrees. That's around 110 degrees Fahrenheit for 19 consecutive days. The Mediterranean basin is on high alert with temperatures well above 40 degrees for several days, meaning there's a risk to everyone's health, not just the most vulnerable. Well, joining me now are our climate editor, Justin Rolat, who is in Alicante in southern Spain. We're also going to be hearing from Sofia Bettiza, who is in Palermo in Italy. And we have Azadeh Moshiri, who is just outside the Greek capital, Athens. And Azadeh, I think we'll start with you first of all, because I want to talk a little bit about what's happened with those wildfires. We saw incredibly worrying pictures yesterday, and I know that they have continued. Talk me through what the latest is where you are.
Still in Mantra, which is west of Athens, but emergency services did send out an alert where we are, that a truck did come by and tell us it was time to move somewhere safer because the area we were reporting from has become an active fire zone. But even here, let me take you with me. And sorry if I turn my back to the camera. I know that's not something we do, but the terrain here is uneven. There is ash all over the ground and you can taste it on your tongue. You can smell it and it is hot. These are really difficult conditions for firefighters. And behind me, you'll see it might look like a haze, but that is a full plume of smoke from the fires in this area. Now, local residents that I've spoken to around Mantra have said that they're angry and upset, that they feel firefighters have not gotten to their homes yet, that have been completely destroyed, and that if they were there sooner, it could have been prevented. But of course, we did put all of this to the firefighting service themselves, and they said these are really difficult conditions, lots of humidity, high heat, and that they're doing the best they can.
Azadeh, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now take you live to Palermo in Sicily and speak to our correspondent there, Sofia Bettiza. And Sofia, the heat and the hot weather just continuing across Italy, and 23 cities now are on red alert.
That's right, Mariam. 23 cities on red alert, which is basically most major cities in the country. Local media are calling this Settimana Infernale, which means week of hell. And we are seeing the impact that this heat is having on people's health. There has been a 20% increase in the number of patients who are being admitted into hospitals with exhaustion and heat stroke and dehydration. Now, it's mostly elderly people, but we are seeing some young people too. And that's not so much because they go in the sun when it's at its hottest, which is at this time of day, by the way, but it's because Italians now have been exposed to these extreme temperatures for several days in a row. And you know, Mariam, it can be very dangerous. Yesterday here in Palermo, 2 people, a man and a woman, both aged 69, died at home alone. And several local newspapers here are reporting that it's because of the heat. because, of course, for the elderly or people who have health issues, existing health problems, being exposed to these temperatures can have a devastating effect.
OK. Sofia Bitiza, thank you very much indeed. Let's cross live now to our climate editor, Justin Rolat, who is in Alicante for us. And Justin, you know, experts are saying that climate change driven by the burning of fossil fuels has played a key role in worsening destructive weather like this.
That's absolutely right. What climate change does is shifts the distribution of hot weather, so makes hot days even more likely and makes them likely to be hotter as well. And that is exactly what we're seeing here in Europe. It's been a hellish week in southern Spain where I've been, and temperatures are expected to peak here today right up into the 40s inland. I have to say, where I am on the coast, there is a breeze which is cooling things down. But you're absolutely right. The World Meteorological Organization is saying that we should expect high temperatures and extreme heat waves like the ones that the world has been enduring, or the Northern Hemisphere's been enduring this week, to become the new normal. It's worth pointing out, as well as here, as you said in the introduction, as well as here in Europe, we've got very similar weather patterns and even higher heat in America and also in Asia. And I should say we focus a lot on southern Europe. North Africa has even higher temperatures. In Tunisia, it has topped 50 degrees Celsius.
Justin, talk us a little bit through what is happening in terms of preparedness, because as we see this continued heat wave becoming more of a normal occurrence, what does that mean for countries and the way that they prepare for the change in climate where they are?
Well, this is such an interesting question, and I think it's very much an open question. Lots of countries are aware that their climate's going to change, and their governments are beginning to think about the kind of adaptation that is necessary. But talking to people inland from here in Murcia, which is the region that we're in, people are saying, well, what happens to agriculture? This is a really important agricultural area for Spain and for Europe. They export a lot of soft fruits and vegetables from here. They grow cucumbers, tomatoes, lemons, that kind of thing. They're saying, you know, can that agriculture survive as temperatures rise, and of course as the water becomes increasingly scarce? And they're also saying, look, this is I'm on a tourist resort, and this place is doing quite well. There are lots of tourists here, but as temperatures rise, lots of tourists will be saying, well, you know, do we really want to endure temperatures in the 40s? Maybe we should go somewhere a little cooler. So they're worried about that industry as well, and thinking about ways they can keep tourists happy during the heat of the day, putting on alternative activities indoors rather than outdoors. So fundamental rethinks about the economy and about the way people live as our climate continues to change thanks to global warming.
OK, Justin Rolat, our climate editor, Sofia Bitiza in Palermo, and Azadeh Moshiri in Greece. Thank you to all of you for bringing us up to date on what's happening where you are. Well, as Justin said there, we have been hearing about those high temperatures in many other parts of the world, and they are impacting the United States. CBS correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti is in Phoenix, Arizona for us. And Jonathan, tell us how hot things are there, how hot they have become, and what the forecast is for the coming days.
Yeah, Marianne, we're here in downtown Phoenix. The sun is not up yet this morning, but the heat certainly is. It's already 93 degrees. That heat expected to rise to triple digits later on today. Yesterday marked the 19th straight day where extreme heat temperatures exceeded 110 degrees. That shattered a record that was previously set nearly half century ago, rather. And the bad news here in Phoenix, Arizona, all of that heat expected to continue for at least another week here in the forecast.
And what's the impact been on people's everyday lives where you are? How are people trying to stay cool?
Yeah, officials are giving some pretty common sense advice, telling people to stay indoors when possible, use AC, drink water, stay hydrated, find shade when outside, don't overexert yourself. But it's easier said than done for people who are unhoused, living on the streets, those that work outside for a living. Since June, officials say nearly 700 emergency calls have been placed in, all of them related to heat, many of them impacting the unhoused, and many of them also impacting those that are working out in these conditions. And there was a pretty incredible scene scene at a local ER that we visited yesterday that shows all the measures that are being put in place to protect those people and save those people that have heat exhaustion and are showing signs of other heat-related illness, including putting them in ice baths for up to 40 minutes, even an hour, to cool down their body temperatures. And another incredible thing here that I had never heard before, paramedics responding to some of these emergency calls are actually injecting patients with ice-cold saline solution in an effort to save their lives.
That's absolutely incredible. I'd never heard of that before, Jonathan. Now tell me, obviously when you think about Arizona, you think it's a dry area, the weather gets very hot. How common are these temperatures in that area in the high summer?
Arizona and people who live here in Phoenix are certainly used to extreme heat, but the record obviously shows with the past 19 days exceeding 110 degrees, they have never been through anything like this. Those that we have spoken with describe it as a furnace. While they are used to the heat and while they have those measures in place, staying inside as much as possible, it really is day-to-day living hard to avoid this heat. And obviously a concern for those people that are outside. There are cooling stations around the city, open around the clock for those that need to escape the heat, whether they live on the streets
Doesn't matter.
or working out on the streets,
say,
or if people need to come in.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for that. And I wanted to take you to some live pictures that are coming into us here at BBC News from mainland Greece. These are wildfires that have been raging for a number of days, and we've seen many, many children evacuated from summer camps. We've seen people running from their homes. We have also seen many, many parts, forests in particular, destroyed by the fires. We've seen many blazes across Greece, and yesterday we saw a huge number of helicopters and small planes flying over the area, trying desperately to try and throw some water down, to release water onto the affected areas. But it's a losing battle because, of course, the temperatures are so high, and the wind, of course, plays another factor as well. So dozens of people have had to leave their homes. Emergency services are working through the days and nights. We've seen also many animals having to be evacuated, including reports of a large number of horses who were in some stables that caught fire at one point. So as we can see here, and as our correspondent Azadeh told me a little bit earlier, the situation is still very, very serious indeed in many parts of Greece. Now, Russia have launched missile strikes on the Ukrainian city of Odessa for a second night in a row. The strikes hit a grain and oil terminal, but authorities have vowed they won't be intimidated from working to keep grain exports moving from its ports. Ukraine's Air Force said 63 missile and drones had been launched across the country by Russia in the attack. Our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse sent us this report.
Why are these attacks on Odessa significant against a backdrop of fairly constant missile strikes across the whole of Ukraine? Well, the region of Odessa and the city itself are central to the grain agreement, which had collapsed 2 days ago. And since then, Odessa has come under what are described as hellish attacks. Last night, around 30 cruise missiles were launched across the whole of the country, and around half, we're told, were aimed at local infrastructure. Now, under the terms of the grain agreement, Russia had agreed to not target ports. And it seems that the Kremlin is trying to send a message. Since pulling out, it's trying to say, we're not bluffing in terms of us withdrawing. And it's also clearly trying to frustrate Ukraine in just about every way possible. Thousands of tons of grain are already starting to pile up. Kyiv has accused Russia of weaponizing food along with Western allies because there are several poorer countries that are extremely reliant on Ukrainian grain exports. So what President Zelensky is trying to do is look at alternatives, either through the Danube River in Central Europe or across land, across Western countries such as Poland and Moldova. But there have been problems with that in the past, where Ukrainian grain has flooded markets there and driven down prices. But what we are seeing is another deliberate act by Russia as it tries to frustrate Ukraine in just about every way possible since the collapse of what was the only major diplomatic breakthrough in this conflict.
That's James Waterhouse in Ukraine. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.
To choose Grana Padano is to embrace its unique Italian values. A moment to be shared. Grana Padano, an Italian feeling.
Are you a raver.
Do I look like a raver?
I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Dancing for like 4 or 5 hours of a gig, you could generate about 800 kilowatt hours of thermal energy.
Right, so shall we give it a taste then? It's my favourite.
We're really talking to the plants, and they're telling us how happy they are.
It can fly, but it can also float on water.
Oh my God, that came by quick.
It's all about augmented reality.
Beautiful, right? Beautiful.
Totally and utterly immersed in another world there.
Your Tech Update. Click on BBC News. As fighting continues in Ukraine, join our team for the latest developments.
There's now a massive effort to rebuild what's been destroyed, but what happened here will never be forgotten.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app, and get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
You're live with me, Marianne Mashiri. More details have emerged about the American soldier who's been detained in North Korea after crossing the border without authorization. Travis King had been detained after getting into fights in South Korea prior to crossing. Court documents show he also damaged a police car and had recently spent some time in detention in Seoul. The 23-year-old serviceman had been recently released and was being sent back to the US for disciplinary reasons when he escaped. Now, he made it across the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea while on a tour of the border. Commonly known as the DMZ, the area is one of the most heavily fortified in the world. It remains unclear what his intentions were for crossing into North Korea. A witness said he saw the soldier laughing while he ran across. While the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, gave a briefing on the matter at the Pentagon.
We believe that he is in the BRK custody. And so we're closely monitoring and investigating the situation and working to notify the soldiers next of kin and engaging to address this incident. In terms of my concerns, I'm absolutely foremost concerned about the welfare of our troop. And so we will remain focused on this. And again, this will develop in the next several days and hours.
Let's cross live now to Elizabeth Palmer, who is a correspondent for CBS News and has visited the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you think about the way in which he made it across? Having been there yourself, what do you make of the way he did it?
He crossed at the only place it's possible to do so. It's a tourist site because it's an historic site. If you remember when President Donald Trump met Kim Jong-un, it was at that place. And it's a place, a hole in the fence, if you like, this long strip of heavily mined, barbed-wired wilderness. And then there's this place in the middle that was designed for prisoner exchanges after the Second World War. And it's been kept relatively open. And that's where diplomatic exchanges take place. And curiously enough, on the American side, tourists can come and look at the buildings and review the history. There used to be North Koreans on the far side, which is only meters away, by the way, guarding their side. But at the beginning of the pandemic, the North Koreans pulled those guards away. Nobody's sure why. And so there was literally nothing between Private King and North Korea. He just dashed between two of those buildings used for diplomatic talks and vanished into the woods and was, according to the U.S. Defense Department, then picked up and is now in custody.
I mean, it's surprising, isn't it, given, Elizabeth, how fortified that region is, that zone is, that there is this kind of gap right there. What kind of reaction do you think we can expect from North Korea? We haven't heard anything from them yet, have we?
We haven't heard a word. The U.S. Department of Defense is trying everything to try and get information about how and where he's being held. But North Korea hasn't said a word, and it comes at very testy time in the, or an especially testy time, hostile time in the relationship between the U.S. And North Korea. North Korea is furious because the Americans have just brought a nuclear submarine to dock in South Korea. There have been skirmishes, or at least very close encounters in the air off North Korea's coasts. The North Koreans say they've scrambled fighter jets because they felt the Americans were flying surveillance aircraft too close. And so you have to ask yourself whether this U.S. soldier becomes some sort of a pawn in diplomatic relations. We will have to wait and see. Lloyd Austin himself said it's going to take several days for the dust to settle and for the Americans to see which way North Korea wants to play this.
Okay, Elizabeth Palmer, correspondent for CBS in London. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this. Now, let's take you to Kenya. Protesters there have thrown rocks at police at the start of 3 days of demonstrations against the cost of living and tax hikes. Schools and businesses across several cities are closed as the country's main opposition leader, Raila Odinga, calls for people to take to the streets. Kenya has suffered election-related conflict for decades, with the worst happening after a 2007 vote where more than 1,000 people died. Well, how serious is the situation now? Anthony Irungu is our reporter in Kenya and joins me now. Anthony, what's the latest?
We have seen some ugly scenes across many cities and towns in Kenya, and especially in Nairobi, where we have seen police and protesters engaging in running battles, police using tear gas canisters to disperse the protesters. And in turn, the protesters are using stones to push back the police. We've also had reports of numerous people being injured by the police, and many of them have been admitted in hospital with gunshot wounds in Nairobi and also in Western Kenya. Many people have also been arrested for taking part in the protest. And yesterday, the police declared the protest to be illegal. And among those who have been arrested are journalists, and there has not been given any cause for that arrest. And there have also been reports that some people close to the opposition leadership have been abducted by people who are believed to be police officers. And until now, their whereabouts has not been known. But there has also been a few calls from many corners and many organizations calling on the opposition and the government to come together and sit down and discuss about all these issues.
We're seeing actually pictures that came into us earlier of protesters throwing rocks at police and just skirmishes between protesters and police. Tell me this, Anthony, this obviously started off as a political thing, didn't it? But now many people are just unhappy with the way that the economy has been run. The cost of living crisis has hit Kenya as it has many other parts of the world, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. As you said, it started off as a political contest between the government and the opposition from the onset until the cost of living. People started feeling the bite of the cost of living. And earlier, the opposition were insisting that President William Ruto was not legally or not validly elected. And even after the Sorry?
Okay, Jonathan, just before I let you go, Anthony, let me ask you this. Tell me a little bit about what we expect to happen over the next few days, because we're expecting 3 days of protests, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. The opposition say that they're going to be having protests today, tomorrow, and Friday. And they have insisted they will have to happen. And as we have seen today, people have come out in large numbers, and more people have come out. And the government has also insisted that they're going to deploy all the resources that they have to ensure that they protect Kenyans, private business, and also state infrastructure. But we are expecting tomorrow opposition are going to come out to protest, and also on Friday.
And finally, I wanted to ask you this. Many people talk about the fact that Kenya has seen a lot of unrest after elections in the past, particularly in 2007, when 1,000 people died. Are there worries here that there could be fatalities this time too?
Yes, definitely. As we saw last week, we had about 14 people who died, and 10 of them, according to human rights organizations, were killed by the police during the protest. And also, it had also degenerated into intercommunal violence in some parts of Kenya, where 3 more people were killed. So it was like they were taking advantage of the protests that were happening across the country, and to revive the intercommunal conflict. As it is now, with calls from human rights organizations saying that the police are using too much force, we are going to see more deadly confrontation between the police and protesters, and you never know where this might lead.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Anthony Irungu, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving us an update. Our reporter there, who is based in Nairobi, will be across that story, of course, as always. But before we leave you, I want to take you live now to Greece and to just show you exactly what's happening in mainland Greece. And you can see here, there are some houses in the foreground, but in the background, very worryingly indeed, there are wildfires raging. The smoke can be seen billowing up from the trees. Now, the hot weather, the wind, you can see the tops of those trees are swaying to and fro, blown by very, very heavy winds, are causing huge problems for firefighters who've said that they are, hundreds of them are currently battling to contain the spread of flames. Children have been evacuated from holiday camps, people have been evacuated from their homes. We've also heard of stables full of horses that had to be opened up and the horses released because it was about to catch fire. We've also heard that lots of helicopters, as you can see there, and special firefighting planes have been given to Greece from other parts of the EU to help them battle the flames. You can see their water being thrown down. As always, we're covering this story here on BBC News. I'll be back in a couple of minutes with more on all the latest stories. Do stay with us on the BBC.